So let's take a look at what we need to cut for our Serendipity Hip. We need to cut a strap and interfacing at 60 inches or 150 centimeters long. You may have to join, and I have done that here, and I didn't have to join the interfacing, so that is on there in one piece. And yes, I did get a bit crooked but it don't matter because that's going to be folded in there and nobody will ever know except you who is watching this now. So for our strap tabs we need to cut 2 exterior contrast and 2 interfacing, and I've done that and fused there. And you'll also need to cut 2 Decaville tab support pieces like that, and we'll apply that during construction. We need to cut 2 exterior zipper pocket interfacing pieces which go onto the exterior zipper pocket. Now some of these have similar names, so make sure you're getting the right interfacing with the right exterior pieces. And the reason that we do that is we're keeping the interfacing out of the seam allowance just to cut down on bulk, because there is a lot of layers at the front of this bag and we don't really want so many layers in the seam. So we need 2 interfacing pieces, 1 exterior, 1 lining. Bottom band, we need 2 exterior contrast, 2 interfacing and 2 fleece. The interfacing and fleece are already fused here, and simply a matter of centering that in fleece. It's less than the bottom band piece because we want to keep that fleece out of the seam allowance, but in this case we have the interfacing into the seam allowance. We need 1 Decaville base support piece cut, and that is applied during construction, so you're just going to have to set that aside for the moment. And we need 1 exterior zipper pocket top band piece and 1 exterior zipper pocket top band interfacing piece, and that gets centered and fused on the back of the fabric. Once again, to reduce bulk. Tabs, we need 1 top zipper tab, 1 exterior and 1 interfacing. That's already fused. The front zipper tabs, we need 4 exterior and 4 interfacing, which I've already fused. The exterior zipper pocket backing, we need 1 exterior, 1 lining and 2 interfacing. The interfacing is smaller. That is just fused on the back, like so, centered. Body exterior, we need 2 body exterior, 2 interfacing and 2 fleece, and that is fused there. The interfacing is the same size as the body exterior on these, and the fleece is less so that you can keep it out of the seam allowance. The body lining, we need 2 lining and 2 interfacing. Interior zipper pocket, we need 2 lining and 2 interfacing. The interior zipper pocket facing, 1 lining and 1 interfacing. The phone pocket, we need 2 lining and 2 interfacing. And your card pockets, we need 1 lining and 1 of the smaller interfacing pieces cut and fused on the center at the back, like that. So that's all the things we need to cut. I'll put that pile aside. Yeah, it's quite a pile, but this bag has a lot of pockets. Hardware. We need zippers. We need 1 11-inch 28 centimeter piece of continuous zipper, number 5. We need another number 5 zipper. This one is 8.5 inches or 21.5 centimeters long. We need a pull for each of those. We need 1 dress zipper for the interior pocket. This one's number 3 and it's 20 centimeters or 8 inches long, and I always cut the metal bits off, so leaving a piece that is 19 centimeters or 7.5 inches long. So hardware, we need 2 D-rings. These are 2 centimeter or 3/4 of an inch D-rings. We need 1 rectangular slider. This is also 2 centimeter, 3/4 of an inch, and 2 snap hooks. These are optional. If you want to attach your strap directly to your bag, you can. I just like to use it for a bit of extra bling. And those are also 2 centimeter, 3/4. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about the inside measurement, because your strap will be 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch wide when we've finished making it. Rivets, optional, but if you want to add some rivets, you need 6 of those. I'm using 8mm caps and 8mm stems. That may vary depending on what thickness your strap is. If you use webbing, you might find it not quite long enough stem, or it does vary, so you'll need to test that rivet when you're making your strap, riveting your strap. I'll show you how to do that during construction. So another optional extra for your Serendipity Hip is a cam snap. That's just to go in the front of the pocket here, just to keep that closed. Some of the testers of this new version were suggesting that this gapes a bit too much, especially when you put a fatter phone in there. So we are adding a cam snap, or well, that's optional, it's up to you. The original does not have a snap there. Most of the time when it's in use, it doesn't really gape, but yeah, it might gape a little bit when there's a fatter phone in there. So the option there is to add a cam snap, and I will show you where to add that during the video. You'll need some double-sided tape, either a little 3mm narrow one like this one, or this is the 6mm, that's a permanent one. This one's a wash away tape. I like this one because it will not gum up your needle when you sew through it, but this one is so narrow, you just simply keep it out of the seam allowance so you don't sew through it. So one of those, trusty lighter just to seal off the ends of your zipper tape, a stitch rip, that's a awl on that side and a stitch rip on this side. They're handy because quite often you might need to use that. Marking implements of some sort. And that's about it. You might like to install a label of some sort into your bag, that's up to you. Alright, let's get started. Okay, so now we're going to make our strap. So all we're going to do is simply fold it in half and press a crease, and then we're going to fold each side long edge into almost meet in the center, like so, just to leave a little gap, because when you fold it needs to have a bit of space there. And then we're going to fold it like that and press again, and once we've done that I'll show you what to do next. So I'm just going to pop over to the ironing board and do that. We need to do some folding here. I'm just going to place it right sides together, just the ends like this, and then we're going to fold it back on itself like so. I'm just going to put a clip here to hold. Going to do the same on the other side. So we're folding it like that, and then like that, and pop in a clip. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch both ends. So we're just going to stitch the ends of our straps using a 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch seam. Stitch length is 2.4. So now that we have stitched the ends of our straps, we're just going to trim these seams back a little bit. Like that. And now we're going to turn. And what we're going to do is just go like this. And like that. And then refold like so. And I like to give the ends a bit of a whack with a hammer just to flatten them and make them easier to stitch. Same with this one. I'm just going to go and give them a good whack with the hammer, and you might find it helpful just to add a few clips here and there to hold your strap while you sew. You want to have those edges, pressed edges, aligned. Like that. Now we're just going to head over to the sewing machine and do some stitching. Okay, so I'm going to stitch my strap using a stitch length of 3.1, and I've put my walking foot on here because I think it does a better job with straps, and I'm stitching 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Try to keep those edges aligned. And there we have it. So now retrieve your strap hardware, slider and D-rings, and your, oh actually you don't need your D-rings yet. Retrieve your slider and your 2 hooks, and we're going to grab this slider and we're going to place it wrong side up, and we're going to put this strap through here if you have a right or a wrong side of a strap, because sometimes one side looks better than the other with the stitching, especially on a domestic. We're putting this wrong sides together, and we're pulling it through. Well, I'm going to pull it through about 3 centimeters. If you were going to stitch a rectangular box, I'd pull it through about 4 centimeters, but I'm just going to fasten mine with a rivet, so that's entirely up to you. So mine's going to be about 3 centimeters, which is 1 1/4 inch. And I'm going to put a clip in here just to hold it over at the sewing machine, and 4 centimeters is 1 1/2 inches. And if you're going to stitch a rectangular box, you just stitch a box around and put a cross in the middle. And my stitches is wonky here, but I'm not going to worry too much because you won't see it. It'll be inside the strap. Now you can measure this if you want, but I just eyeball this. So I'm going to put it about 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch down from the edge, centered. Like that. Grabbing one of my rivets. I will test this one. This is an 8mm stem. And that is a little long because we've got more than just the knobbly bit poking out when I compress those layers. So I think that rivet is a bit long, so I'm going to use a smaller one. This is a 6mm one. And when I compress the layers, I have only got the knobbly bit sticking out, so that's the one I'm going to use. Clip those together, move that out of the way. My other contraption and set my rivet. You can do both, a rectangular box and a rivet if you wish, like that. Okay, so now that we have our first piece done, we need to retrieve a hook. And we're going to place that onto our strap so that it's facing outward. like that, and we're going to bring this through, up and over that center bar, and pull it through. So you have it like that, and then this end we need to put the hook on also facing outwards. Pull that over through and place that 3 centimeters if you're adding a rivet like me, or which is 1¼ inch, or 4 centimeters if you want to stitch a rectangular box. And that's just a rough guide to sizes. You can do whatever size you feel works best for you, like that. So that is our strap done, and we can just put that aside for later. Okay, so now we're going to make our strap tabs. So retrieve the 2 snap tab pieces and your Decaville heavy, and what we're going to do is just simply finger press that into the center, just lightly there, and then fold in each side to the, and almost meet in the middle. I'm just going to grab my double-sided tape, and I'm going to put it on the outer edges of these folds, or outer raw edges of the tab. This will just help hold it while I press, so that I don't scorch my fingers, because otherwise it's a bit fiddly. Doesn't have to be exactly in the middle, just eyeball it will be fine. Pull that over, same on this side, pull that over, and then that will go through the D-ring like that, and then the bulk will be very minimal down here where it's attached to your bag, but it will be strong from the Decaville. If you are using something thicker like vinyl or something, you may just need to use a piece of Decaville light to keep the bulk down. It works very well as well because it's really strong and not bulky. So, but before we add the D-ring, we should do some top stitching. I'm just going to repeat with this piece. Like that. Now I'm going to go over to the iron, and I'm just going to go and press that to make sure it's nice and firmly attached, and we'll also fuse that Decaville, and then I'll leave it cool just for a few minutes because it's not going to really move all that much inside here, and it doesn't matter if it comes unstuck later. And then I'm going to top stitch down both the 2 long edges. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch from each long edge, and I'm using a stitch length of 3.1. That's the first one. Just repeat for the second. Okay, so now that we have stitched our strap tabs, we need to retrieve our D-rings, and we're just going to place each strap tab through the D-ring, fold over, wrong sides together, and just add a clip to hold. And do the same with this one. Wrap it around, match up those raw edges and clip to hold. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch or baste those 2 ends together, 6mm 1/4 of an inch from the edge. And after you've stitched them raw ends together, then we're just going to stitch as close as we can using a zipper foot to each of those D-rings. Just stitch across there. So do not add a rivet at this stage. If you're planning to add rivets, you need to add them later after we've constructed the bag. Otherwise they'll get in the road of your stitching and be annoying. Might break a needle. And I'm going to stitch 6mm, 1/4 of an inch from the edge, just to base those ends together. Just start in the middle because I find that tends to push or keep it more even rather than pushing one away from the other. Just like that. I'm going to remove that and stitch this as close as my foot will let me, and I'm starting somewhere in the middle again just to try and keep these edges aligned so I don't end up with crooked strap, and I should have held that under there. Like that. I'll do the same for this one. Like that. Now we need to trim these threads away. So retrieving your phone pocket pieces, we need to grab, well, I'm going to use double-sided tape, but you can press if you like. Just press at the iron, but I actually do both. I press and use double-sided tape. So I'm just going to put double-sided tape on each short end. Turn that seam allowance under. This is not a critical measurement, so I'm just going to guess it, eyeball it. Now to make sure I get the last one even, so I have both pieces even, I'm just going to clip those together there. And for this one, I will use the other one underneath in case my eyeballs haven't been very accurate. I can just line up those edges like that, and you can go over to the ironing board and give it a press as well, or only use the iron. And then once you've done that, stitch the top and bottom edges. So now I'm going to stitch my pone pocket. The top and bottom edges, 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch from the edge or seam allowance. My stitch length is 2.4. Like that. Take off the clips. Now we're going to go over to the ironing board and just press the seam open on the other side as well. Okay, so now that I have pressed that seam, stitch the seam and press the seam right open, and I do that because I just find it does a neater edge when you turn it. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm going to turn it right side out, like so. And then I am going to go back over to the ironing board and I'm going to press it like that. Now once you have pressed it, we're just going to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch along the top edge, 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge. You can also stitch it 6mm 1/4 of an inch from the edge if you'd like a bit of extra decorative stitching there. That's up to you. So now I'm going to top stitch the top edge of my phone pocket, 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and I'm going to make my top stitch length 3.1. And now I'm going to do another row, 6mm 1/4 of an inch from the edge, just for looks only. Okay, so now that we have stitched the top of edges of our phone pocket, we need to retrieve one body exterior piece, set the other one aside for now, and I'm going to place this pocket on here centered left to right. So I'm just going to mark the center. Just going to make it a little bit more visible. That's not my fading marker, I don't want that. I'm just marking it in the seam allowance anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Just grabbing a ruler, and we're going to place this 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch up from the edge. Like that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch these 3 sides and back tack up at each corner just to secure it, because that's a high stress point. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge. I'm using my top stitch length of 3.1, and I'm just going to go back and forwards a couple of times at each top corner to secure it. So now that we have done that, we can set that aside, and we're going to work on our exterior zipper pocket. So retrieve your 8.5 inch 21.5 centimeter zipper and your front zipper tabs. There should be 4 of those. I'm going to use 2 on each end. So what we're just going to do is I'm actually going to add some double-sided tape here just to make it easier. Going to put this on each end, on the right side and on the back side as well. You don't have to do this, you can just clip it or whatever you wish. So now peel that off and place that right side down on there, aligning with those raw edge ends. Do the same on this side, like that. Now flip it over and do the other side. Like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over the sewing machine and stitch a 1 centimeter seam allowance on each end. I'm just going to add this clip as well to make sure it doesn't shift, like that. And now we'll go over to the sewing machine and stitch. Okay, so now we're going to stitch with a stitch length of 2.4, 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch from the edge. And now I'm going to finger press these. Well, actually I'm going to trim away those threads first. Now I'm going to finger press them edges away. Start a clip to hold. Now I'm going to top stitch 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge, top stitch length of 3.1. I'm just going to baste the end edges together as well. 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. 2 millimeters on this side. Finger press those edges. Retrieving your exterior zipper pocket pieces and now place the exterior piece right side up like so, and grabbing your double-sided tape, run a strip along the top edge like that, and peel off that backing. And now you can decide here which side of the bag you would like to have your zipper on. I like to wear my bag across the body, resting on my right side, and in that position I like to have the zipper opening from front to back. So I will position my zipper face down with the zipper pull opening from the right side. So I want mine like this. I'm just going to center that left to right and stick it in place. Get that pull out of the way. Press that down to really stick it like that. Now we're going to run another strip of double-sided tape along that edge. Only needs to go out to that point there, level with your body piece. We will trim that off later, so don't worry about that now. Like that. Press it down so it really sticks. Peel the backing off. And we'll just put this right sides together with your zipper like that. And press into place. I need to do a little bit of extra care there where the zipper pull is, because that always tends to want to push it wonky. But when I stitch, I move that pull out of the way. So there we go. And now we're going to head over to the sewing machine and stitch using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. I'm going to put my stitch length back down to 2.4. I'm going to change to my zipper foot. Move my needle over to the left, and stitching using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. So get near the zipper head. I like to push that out of the way so I don't get a wonky seam. So now we have stitched that long edge there. We're just going to flip our fabric over like so, and we're going to press that so it's all nicely pressed, and then we're going back over to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch this top edge 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fold. Okay, so now we're going to top stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge of our fold, which I just pressed with my iron. And my stitch length is back up to 3.1. Okay, so now that we have done that, we need to retrieve our exterior zipper pocket top band piece and grab my double-sided tape again. Just going to run it along the top edge here. And retrieving our top band piece again, our exterior zipper pocket top band. Now we're going to place this right side down. If you have a directional fabric, you might want to check that you're making sure that you're getting the direction right. Just press that in place like that. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch with a 6mm 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch using a 6mm 1/4 inch seam and putting my stitch length back down to 2.4. Just going to move my zipper head out of the way. Like that. Now we're just going to go over to the ironing board and we're going to press that, but do not top stitch it at this point. Okay, so now that we've done that, don't top stitch that yet. We'll do that at a later stage. Just set that aside for the minute and grab our exterior zipper pocket backing pieces, and we're going to place them wrong sides together. Yep, wrong sides together like that, and pin the top edge. So just pay attention if you're using a directional fabric. And we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're just going to baste these together with a 3mm 1/8 inch seam. Just putting my regular foot back on again, putting my needle back to the center. My stitch length is 2.4, but doesn't matter with this, we're just doing a basting stitch. 3mm 1/8 inch from the edge. Like that. So now that we've done that, retrieve our zipper pocket again, and we're going to place our exterior side with the top basting right sides together down onto our zipper pocket assembly, and we're going to pin that top edge. Make sure your sides are all lined up, the top edges are all even, like that. So we have the right sides of our pocket and our right sides of our backing piece together like that, and we're going over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch that top seam. Okay, we're going to stitch using a 1cm 3/8 inch seam, and my stitch length is 2.4. Now that we have done that, we're going to do some grading. First thing I'm going to do is trim off my basting stitches here, making sure I'm cutting that layer only, not the bottom piece. I usually use my duckbill scissors for this, but it's down at the house. Makes the job easier though. Now that I have trimmed that off, I'm going to trim this top layer here back to about 1/8 inch, which it probably already is on this end. But I'm leaving that one underneath longer, wider. Like that. Now I'm going to go over to the iron and we're just going to press it that way first, and then we're going to turn that and press that like that. So now that we have done that, I'm just going to put a couple of clips just to hold everything in place. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch all along there, 3mm 1/8 inch from the edge, and then we're going to top stitch 3mm 1/8 inch along the edge next to your zipper tape, and then we shall baste the sides and bottom. Okay, so putting my stitch length back up to my top stitch length of 3.1, I'm going to top stitch this top edge 3mm 1/8 inch from the edge, that. And now I'm going to switch to my zipper foot, moving my needle over. And now I'm going to stitch the other seam here, 3mm, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And now I'm going to put my regular foot back on again. And I'm going to baste these sides, 3mm, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can just cut these zipper tabs even with the sides of our zipper pocket. Like that. And now we just need to retrieve our body piece with our phone pocket attached. And we're just going to lay that down on there and pin or clip the two sides. So you might want to install a cam snap at the front just to hold that shut so it doesn't gape, and in that case just simply mark the halfway mark, the center right there in the band, center it that way and center it that way, and then punch a hole straight through both pieces with that clipped where it's going to go, and then install your cam snap. And there I have installed my cam snap. So just make sure that you're getting them the right way. You don't want to have this part on the outside or that part on that side. And I also have added a scrap of cork just to give that a bit of support here at the back. You can use Decaville light, Decaville heavy, anything like that, or even foam, but just to give it a bit more extra support there on the back. And there we have a cam snap. Like that. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to baste those 3 raw edges using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. Okay, so now that we have basted that in place, we will retrieve our bottom band, or one of them at least, and we're going to place that right sides together with the bottom edge of our body piece. And I'm just going to add some clips here to hold it in place. I'm not stitching these side edges, I'm just putting the clips there to hold the base so it stays in the right spot. All I'm going to do is stitch this bottom edge. So we'll head over to the sewing machine and stitch that bottom edge. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch this bottom seam using a 1cm 3/8 of an inch seam, and I'm putting my stitch length back down to 2.4. May want to go a bit wonky because of that pressure of the phone pocket and everything underneath there. Just keep a bit of pressure on it so it stays at your seam allowance, and if it doesn't, you can always stitch this seam using a zipper foot. Like that, and it's a bit wonky there. I can fix that. Easy peasy. So now that we have stitched this bottom seam, we're just going to press this down like so, and then we're going back over to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch on the bottom band side 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So now I'm just going to top stitch on the bottom band side 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge, top stitch length of 3.1. So now that we have completed this exterior front piece, we're going to do the same to add our bottom band to our other body exterior piece. So set that one aside, grab your remaining bottom band piece. Now head over to the sewing machine and stitch this bottom seam. Okay, so now we're going to stitch the bottom seam on our second exterior body piece, and I'm putting my stitch length back down to 2.4. My seam allowance is 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. Now I'm going to go over to the ironing board and I'm just going to press the seam down towards the body band, the bottom band, like that, and then I'm going to come back and top stitch. Okay, I pressed that now, so I'm just going to top stitch this 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and top stitch length of 3.1. And we're going to work on our interior zipper pocket. So we need our interior pocket, zipper pocket facing, and our 2 interior zipper pocket pieces, and we need our number 3 zipper, which should be 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters long. So now we need to draw some lines on the back of our facing. So now that we've done that, we need to retrieve a lining piece, 1 body lining piece. Let's set the other one aside for now. And we're just going to fold this in half and press a crease. And that needs to be 4 centimeters or 1 5/8 of an inch down from the very top there. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm just going to stitch either end of this zipper tape 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch from the ends, just to make sure I don't pull the zipper off by mistake at any time, and it will also just secure that nicely. And while we're at the sewing machine, we're going to stitch those 2 lines, the bottom and the top line, not the inside line. Okay, so first off I'm just going to run some stitches along the ends of my zipper so that the teeth stay together. I'm stitching approximately 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch from the end. Just make a couple of times. Like that. And now I'm going to stitch the 2 outside lines. I'm going to start right at the point. There's my underneath thread. It's going to bunch up if I don't hold it. Now I'm stitching with a stitch length of 2.4. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to cut a hole down the center here. Start it with the stitch rip and then grab a scissors, Now we're going to cut to this point and then out to those points there, but make sure you don't snip your stitches, but if you do, don't panic, just go back and reinforce them at the machine. Okay, so now what we're going to do is pop over to the iron and just press the fabric over like that, and then on this side back down like that. So just give that a press. Now that you've done that, what we're going to do is I like to mark 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch back from the end point, and I'm just eyeballing it because it does not have to be an accurate measurement. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to edge stitch right close to that fold there on that side between the marks, and same on this side between the marks. Now I'm just going to top stitch either side of this facing. I'm going to use my top stitch length of 3.1, and I'm going to stitch close to the fold, starting on the line that I made. Like that on that side, and now repeat for the other side. Just make sure you fold that fabric back out of the way so it doesn't get caught in your stitching. And start on the line. Ending on the line like that. So now that we have stitched either side of our facing, we're just going to poke this through to the other side. And we're going to finger press this so that that seam is right there at the opening, and you can see the stitching that we did on the wrong side here like this. And I'm going to go over to the ironing board and thoroughly press both sides and give that a good press. I'll be back in 2 ticks. Now if you find that it's pulling at any of the corners, just go back and snip in a little further with your stitching, with your scissors, just to get a bit closer to your stitches, but make sure you don't snip them, and if you do, go back to the sewing machine and reinforce. Now I also like to grab my fray stopper and just put a little tiny dob in each corner, just in case that tends to fray there, because we have clipped very close to the stitching. Now just pop that aside for the second. Retrieve your pockets. Now these are a square, so if it's not directional, it doesn't matter how you have it facing, but we're going to run some double-sided tape along the top edge of both pieces, like that. Now peel the backing off. Now we're placing this right side up, or wrong side down, onto the right side of the fabric and press into place. Now we're just going to head over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. Just going to put my zipper foot back on, move my needle over, put my stitch length back down to 2.4 and stitch this zipper into place using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. like that. Now I'm just going to go over to the ironing board and press the fabric away from the zipper. Now we're going to place the zipper pocket right side down onto the right side of our other zipper pocket piece, and the zipper is wrong side down. Just line up those side edges of the pocket. Like that. So now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. Okay, so stitching the other side of my zipper in place using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. Like that. And now we're just going to go over to the ironing board, and I'm going to press the fabric away from the zipper like that. Okay, so now that we have done that, we need to retrieve our body lining piece again. Flip that over to the wrong side. Grab a double-sided tape. I'm just going to run that on either top, well, on both the top and bottom edges of our window, like that. Peel that tape off. Now this is where you can decide whether you want your pocket to open from left to right or right to left. For this I'm going to have it opening left to right, so I'm placing the pullover on the left. And I'm just going to line up the facing edges with the edges of the zipper pocket. And press that into place. Trying to get that even. And when you're happy with where that is sitting, just put in a pin at the top here and one down the bottom here, just so that that holds that and you won't accidentally stitch the wrong thing in the wrong place. So now we'll go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch all the way around our pocket window. Okay, so I'm going to stitch all the way around my pocket window. Now this is where you can either decide to pull your threads back to the linings to the underside and knot off, or you can just back tack like I'm about to, and I'm using a stitch length of 3.1 and stitching 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fold of the zipper pocket window. Going to go backwards and forwards here just to reinforce that. Back to where we started and just back tack to secure. And there we have it. Okay, make those pins disappear. We'll flip that over. We're going to smooth that down. Just going to put a pin into the pocket pieces only at the sides. And I'm just going to grab my scissors and I'm just going to trim this excess zipper pocket off here at the top. And just going to trim the excess pocket off at the bottom so that the edges are even. Like that. Now I'm going to fold under the seam allowance on the bottom edges of the pocket. We're not going to stitch that close because we're going to be closing our lining through the bottom edges of the pocket. Now you can just use the iron to press under that seam allowance, or you can be like me and use the double-sided tape and the iron, because I find that easier. I normally end up scorching my finger if I try and do it with the iron only. That's not a critical measurement, so I'm just eyeballing approximately my 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here. And then I'm just going to flip that over, get that out of the way, and do the same on the other side. Like that. So we have that, and we can take it over to the sewing machine, and we're just going to stitch from the lining side up like that. And we're just going to stitch the 2 sides only, and we're also going to stitch these little V's here at the side just to secure off that pocket. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch my sides of my pocket. I'm just going to have my actually cut. I'll go back to my zipper clip, still there from doing the pocket. Okay, right. So now let's do our zipper pockets. We're going to start by stitching these little corner edges. Don't want to stitch your lining, so just right next to it. Back and forth a couple of times. This will just reinforce that end of the zipper as well, so it's a high stress point at each end here. This will give it a bit more strength. Like that. And now I'm going to put my regular foot back on. Put my needle over into the centre. And my stitch length is 2.4, by the way. And 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam to shut my sides of my pocket, but I'm not closing the bottom, only the sides. 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. And other side. There we have our zipper pocket stitched, and the bottom is left open. And we're going to work on our card pockets. So just retrieve that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn under the seam allowance on each short end. You can press that with an iron or be like me and use double-sided tape. It's up to you. Now fold it in half, top to bottom, like that, right sides together, and press a crease. This is to find the center of the pocket piece. Now that we've pressed that crease, fold that in to meet at the crease, and we're just going to pop a couple of clips on either sides to hold. Like that. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch those 2 sides. Okay, so now we're going to stitch the 2 sides of our card pockets. We're going to use a stitch length of 2.4 and a seam allowance of 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. Other side. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're just going to trim these corners back. Like that, and through this opening here we're going to turn it right sides out. I'm just going to use this blunt endish, well, it's not real blunt, so I'm not pressing too hard. I just want to push these corners out. I normally have a teddy bear stuffing stick which I'm using, but I don't have it here, so I don't have many tools here. I need to get 2 of everything. Okay, so now I've done that, I'm going to go over to the ironing board and I'm going to press all that flat. And now that I have that pressed like that, so now that we've pressed that, we need to go back over to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch from both short ends. Okay, so now I'm going to top stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge using a stitch length of 3.1. The other side, so now that we have top stitched both short ends, we need to grab a ruler and we're going to draw a line 3 inches down, or 7.6 centimeters from that top edge, just with a friction or fading marker. And from the bottom, I didn't go all the way across. And from the bottom edge, we need to do it 3 1/4 inches up, or 8.3 centimeters. 3 1/4, not 2 1/4. 3 1/4 inches up, or 8.3 centimeters. So now what we're going to do, I'm actually just going to mark a line here so it makes it easier for me to show you where I'm stitching afterwards. So retrieve your body lining piece and we're going to place this on here, and it's going to be 2.5 inches down from the center, so we need to find the center like that. And we'll just mark the center of this. Just do it with a pin. And this needs to be 2.5 inches down to, I'll put that line, put that on the center, and 2.5 inches. Just making sure that these points are the same over here, so everything is lined up neat like that, and we're going to pin that in place like that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch around this box. So we're going to start here, 3mm 1/8 of an inch back from the edge, stitch to this end to the 3mm 1/8 of an inch mark there, and go across, pivot and go across, and then pivot again and stitch back to there and stitch back to there. Okay, so now we're going to stitch our card pockets in place. Going to start 3mm 1/8 of an inch back from the edge. Pivot and stitch. Pivot. Okay, so now that we've stitched that box, I'm just going to take these pins out. I'm just going to pop over to the iron and just give it a press like that. Okay, so now that we've pressed that, we're just going to put a pin in either side. And we can still see where the centre mark is, so we're just going to draw a line down that centre mark, or down the centre of our card pockets, like that. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to back tack a couple of times at each of these points here, and we're going to stitch, not the thread, we're going to stitch all the way down here, cross here and up the side here using a 3mm 1/8 of an inch seam. And then when we've done that, we're going to stitch this pocket in half here if you wanted to, so you don't have to take your machine needle out of your fabric or cut. Don't put that in there. If you wanted to, you could stitch down here, cross here, up here, and pivot and come back down here and across like that. but I'm doing it like this and then that center pocket. Okay, so I'm going to start over in this corner. I'm stitching using a stitch length of 3.1 and I'm back tacking to make sure it's secure since these are high stretch points. I'm going to do the same across this next pocket. Pivot. Pivot. I went too far there. Anyway, now I'm going to stitch my pocket in half. Now I'm stitching just on the left side of the line. I'm going to stitch up there, then I'm going to take a stitch and then pivot and stitch right down next to the other side of the line. I'm just going to back tack here, take a stitch. Whoops, I went 2 stitches. Now I'm just going to stitch back down again. Retrieve your number 5 zipper, 28 centimeters or 11 inches, and if you haven't put your pull on, put it on now. And we need our top zipper tab. So what I'm going to do is press the seam allowance, 1 centimeter seam allowance on each short end. I'm going to press them under, but I'm just going to use double-sided tape like I always do. Like that, and now I'm just going to get that tape off and press my seam allowance 1 centimeter under, and same on the other end. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch the zipper end of the zipper closed, and I'm just going to do it 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. 3 millimeter, 1/8 of an inch from the edge of my zipper tape. Okay, so now I'm going to actually just go over to this iron and I'm just going to press this in half. So I've pressed that in half. I'm just going to open that back out and I'm just going to put some double-sided tape on each end. Like that. And now I'm going to peel that off. Double-sided tape. And I'm just going to bring this zipper in here and I'm just going to bring it back about 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the zipper tape, and I'm just going to fold that over, press that in, because I want this end of the zipper well back from this end to keep it easier to get a neat finish when we assemble our body. Like that, and I'm just going to put a clip in there to hold it as well. And I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch here and top stitch here, 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from each edge. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch or top stitch with stitch length of 3.1, and I'm going to stitch 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the teeth side. And I'm going to stitch 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from this folded side. Okay, so now that we have our tab added to the end of our zipper, we're going to grab a scissors and starting about 1 inch back from our open end, or maybe 1.5 inch back, we're just going to make little 1/8 of an inch snips into our zipper tape. Now if you don't feel that you're confident in knowing whether your tape is something that should be snipped or not, just skip this part and just leave it as it is. One or two of the testers did it without snipping and seemed to manage just fine. It will be just a little bit more awkward rather to get that around the curve than when it's snipped. It just goes a little bit easier. So yeah, just decide on whether your tape is snippable or not. And we're going to do this at 1 centimetre intervals along our tape. Do the same on the other side. Like that. And you can see that that will just help that move and bend around our body. Just set that to the side. So retrieve your back body piece and we're just going to make a mark 3.8 centimeters or 1.5 inch in from this corner. And same on the other side. Like so. Retrieving your strap tabs that we prepared earlier, we need to lay that just inside that mark and place it so that the line aligns with the edge of your body, and just add a clip to hold that in place because we're going to go over to the sewing machine and baste that on. Going to do the same over here on this side, placing it so that it's just inside that mark, clipping to hold, and now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and just baste those on. Okay, so now we're just going to baste our strap tabs in place using a 6mm 1/4 inch seam, and you can just make sure that lines up by holding it. Just like that. And the same for this side. Like that. So now's the time to decide which side of your bag you like your zipper to open from. I wear my bag across my body, resting on my right side, and in that position I like to have the zipper opening from front to back with the zipper pocket facing outward. So I position my zipper face down with the zipper pull on the left side of my exterior back body piece and the tab over on the right, and that way I will end up with my zipper pull on the right side when I'm carrying my bag, how I like it. So now we'll make a mark, or measure and make a mark 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from this corner point here. Just going to put a mark there and a mark over here, like so. I'm going to grab some double-sided tape and I'm going to run, actually I might use my thicker one here, hopefully it'll hold it better. I'm just going to go over the top of the strap tab, work my way all the way around, back over to the other mark I just made, like that. Remove that double-sided tape backing, grabbing the zipper, open it all the way, and now we're going to place it face down, or almost all the way face down, lining your tab with that mark, and just press that down all the way around there. And when we get to here, we are just going to bend that off like so, and I'm just going to put a little pin in there to hold that tape at that angle. And I also like to add a few clips just around here just to make sure that that tape stays put. Sometimes the double-sided tape doesn't hold enough, so the tape and the clips will do the trick. Like that. And now I'm going to stitch the entire seam, or baste it in place, baste the zipper in place using a seam of approximately 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Just using a stitch length of 2.4 or 3.1, whatever, it won't matter. It's just to baste this here so it stays while we add the lining. Move my zipper out of the way. Like that. Okay, so now that we have the zipper attached on that side, and yeah, that looks a bit rough because I had to redo this bit because I forgot to turn the camera on, didn't I? Anyway, we're going to grab the other exterior body piece and we're just going to repeat the process. Mark 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch in from each side. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and baste it in place. Now I'm just going to baste the whole zipper in place using a 3 millimeter 1/8 of an inch seam. Just going to add some clips like I usually do. Silly me. Retrieving your body lining pieces. Now's the time to decide where you're going to put your zipper pocket and your card pockets. I like to put my lining piece with the card slots next to the front zipper pocket. So that one goes with that one and this one goes with that one. So I will start with this one here with the zipper pocket, and I'm adding it to my back piece like that. Now first we'll trim these excess zipper tails off to about 1/2 inch or so. It's not important exactly this measurement, but just get rid of some of that excess tail. So now what we will do is grab some tape and we're going to run it all the way right from each corner point around the top, across the tab like that. Press that down, so peel off that backing, and we're just going to add this lining. Like that, and I'm just going to add some clips just to help hold it there. Like that. So we've got the lining, this body's just hanging down across out of the way, and we're going to go over to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch it in place using a 6 millimeter 1/4 of an inch seam. So now we're just going to stitch this in place using a 6 millimeter 1/4 of an inch seam. I need to move my needle back over to the other side, and I'm using a stitch length of 2.4. double check under there to make sure your strap tab is out of the way, your D-ring. Like that. Now I like to also just go back and double stitch around the strap area just to reinforce it and give it, it's the strap tab, not the strap, just to reinforce the area. Give it a bit more strength. And same on this side. Like that. Now when you finish stitching that seam, just inspect it to make sure that that has sat right at the back side. I caught a bit of my body exterior in there, so I had to unpick it and restitch that bit. So once you've checked that it's sitting right, and my fleece is coming away a bit there, then you need to just turn this out right side out, flip that out of the way, and we're just going to finger press the fabric away from the zipper on both sides. Work your way around, and then we're going to stick a few pins in just to hold both layers away so that they don't get caught in their stitching underneath like I just did with that zipper. Never mind. Now just going to pull that down nicely and add some stitches. Actually, I'm going to be top stitching from this direction, so I'm just going to add them pins from this direction. Now obviously if you're using a vinyl or leather, you won't be able to pin, so you'll just have to make sure that as you work your way around top stitching that those two layers are held down, because you don't want to have them rolling underneath into the wrong spot. So I'm feeling that underneath to make sure that it is smoothed out and correct, like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're actually going to top stitch about 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch back from the edge of that bent zipper, and all the way around, or starting this end, 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch before that zipper tab, stitch all the way around to just 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch or so after the zipper tape. Okay, so now that we have that all pressed out of the way, going to pinned and pressed, going to top stitch using a stitch length of 3.1 all the way around the top there, 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Ending just 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the zipper teeth. And yeah, I ended up stitching all the way. Oh, I'm not having a good day today, so I'm just going to unpick this first bit. Don't do what I just did. So what you need to do is start 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the zipper tab, and my thread. So you have a gap there and a gap there. That will just help get a nice finish when we add the lining. Okay, so now that we have this lining stitched in place, it's time to repeat the process of adding the card pockets piece to the other side. Now when you're stitching this, just make sure that your other body exterior piece is out of the way when you're stitching the way around. You can double check as you go, because you don't want to catch it in your seam like I just did in the last seam. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam, and I'm just going to be double checking all the way around that I'm not stitching something that shouldn't be stitched underneath. Let's make sure that the body exterior is pulled down. Now that I've stitched it, I'm flipping it over and checking, and yes, all good. Nothing is where it shouldn't be stitched. Okay, so we're going to repeat that and turn and finger press and top stitch. Remember, if you're using a vinyl, you cannot pin. Double checking underneath. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and remember to start top stitching 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the zipper tape and end 3mm 1/8 of an inch after the zipper tab. Okay, so we're going to stitch this second side. We're going to stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge using a stitch length, top stitch length of 3.1, and I'm starting 3mm 1/8 of an inch back from the start of my zipper teeth there. Remembering to end 3mm 1/8 of an inch or so after the end of the tab. Like that. Okay, so now that we have done that, we need to grab our two exterior pieces and pull the lining pieces out one side and our base out the other, and we're just going to pin these two base pieces together along the bottom edge. Like so, and if you haven't added a label, you better do that before you start doing this bit. It's the last chance you got to be able to access that without stitching it into your lining. So now that we've done that, we just need to stitch that seam. So now we're going to stitch the bottom of our bag, the exterior base pieces together, bottom band. 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and putting my stitch length back down to 2.4. Like that. Now we're going to go over to the ironing board and we're going to flip that out, and we're going to press this seam open like that. If you can see, press the seam open like so. Okay, so now that I have pressed my seam open, I'm going to retrieve my Decaville base support, and I'm going to, on the non-glue side, I'm just going to mark the halfway point on both short ends like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some double-sided tape on the back of this, the Decaville, so it holds it in place until I can fuse it. Just like that. Now I'm going to line that up with that center seam. Same on this side, make sure that its fabric's pulled out, and center that there. Press that down, and now I'm going to go over to the ironing board and I'm going to fuse that into place, and then I'm going to let it cool for half an hour, so that's a good time for me to go and have a cuppa. So now that my glue has dried, we're going to head over to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch either side of the seam. So just open your zipper right up, because you'll have to do it the top stitching from an angle like this, and it's a little awkward, but it's not that hard. And yeah, we're going to stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch either side of that seam. Okay, so now we're going to stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch either side of our seam. Top stitch length of 3.1. Stitching the other side. Okay, so now that we have stitched our base in place, our deckerville, top stitch those side seams, the seam on either side, and I've got threads everywhere. So now what we're going to do is flip this lining to this side, and we're going to bend that base like that. And we're going to pin or clip the entire seam line on either side, and just match up your base bottom band seams so that they're sitting together, lining up together. This thick area here, I'm just going to use some clips. Now your tops are facing towards the lining. I'm just going to clip this here, pin that one, clip that. Like that. And flip that around, we'll do the other side. Oh, before we go any further, I just remembered, and good job I did, you need to make sure that your top zipper is open, and so is your pocket. So open your zipper pocket, the one that we're going to turn through, that needs to be all the way open, and your top needs to be open. So there. And it's not the first time that I have done this and forgot to open zipper pockets, and then yeah, that makes it very awkward. Just make sure your tops and your thing is facing towards the exterior top there. And if it is a little out of line, don't worry, we'll just ease that in there in our stitching, like that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and completely stitch from one end to the other. Do not stitch this. So now we're going to stitch these side seams using a 1 cm 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and my stitch length is back down to 2.4. Now this is getting quite bulky as we get to this bit here. Now if you find that you can't maintain your seam allowance with your regular foot, you can come back to this and fix any wonky areas with a zipper foot. Now I actually like to stitch this seam a second time, especially on the body exterior side, right next to the first line of stitching. Now do the other side. Stitch it again. Next to the first stitching. Okay, so now it's time to form our base, and we just need to, well, it might help if you put your arm down in there into the body. Just push this out and we'll just form that bottom like that, the seam open, and see if you can match up those seams and either clip or pin to hold. And now do the same on the other side. And we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch both sides, both corners. Oh, you probably can't see it, but yeah, there. Okay, so now we're going to stitch these bottom corners. Just flatten that out as best you can, and using a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam, and stitch length is 2.4. And now do the other side. Like that. So now that we have stitched our base, we're going to turn this right side out. Now, putting your arm into your open lining, grab that bottom and pull it through. Poke out your bottom corners. Now what I like to do is I like to go over to my hammer and I like to give these thick seams a whack with my hammer just to get them to sit nicer, and I cover my work with some scraps to do so, and I do the same on this side, just get those thicker seams to sit better. And we'll do some pressing afterwards, but I'm just going to go and do some whacking. Okay, so now I've hammered my seams and I've manipulated it around, because you do need to kind of move it and pull it and push it and shove it and stretch it around to get it to sit nice, because it's quite thick in places, so you do need to move it around and just get it to all sit nice. And then once you've done that, what we need to do is open our zipper pocket, or if we've already got it open actually. So in through the zipper pocket, through the bottom of our zipper pocket, if you put your hand through there and grab the bottom of the lining, and we'll pull that out through our zipper pocket so that you can see it like that. Like so. Go over to the sewing machine and just stitch that seam. Okay, so now we're stitching the bottom seam of our lining. 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam, stitch length of 2.4. Okay, so now that we have stitched our lining seam, we need to form these corners. So just pull them out and line up the seams. Press the seams open. So there we have those two pinned. We're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch those corners. Okay, so now we're going to stitch these bottom corners using a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam, and our stitch length is 2.4. Okay, so now that we have stitched our bottom corners, that was supposed to be pressed open, but it's not, but that's okay. Now what we need to do is push that back down in there, push the lining down in there, but our zipper pocket needs to stay out. Our zipper pocket. And I'm just going to trim these corners back like that. Same with this one on this side. Like that, and now I'm just going to line up these edges of this zipper pocket. Like that. Now I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch very close to that edge. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch really close to the edge of this bottom of the zipper pocket, trying to not go off the edge. I'm actually going to lengthen my stitch length to 3.1. And trying to keep those layers together, and don't worry too much. If you do go wonky somewhere and run off, you can just finish it and correct it at the end. Because I always recommend inspecting the seam to make sure you haven't got a hole. So now that we have stitched the bottom of our pocket shut and we've made sure it hasn't got a hole in it, we need to shove that back down inside our bag. Poke out those corners, and you can even go and whack them if you wanted to, just to make them sit a bit flatter. Okay, now I've poked my zipper pocket down in there, poking my lining down into the corners like so. And now if you want to add some rivets, Now's the time to do it. If you want to add one onto here, just make sure that you have your zipper out of the way. You don't want to be riveting your zipper. And if you want to add one to the bottom below the thing, you're going to see it on both sides, but that's fine. It'll make it nice and secure. Okay, so I'm just going to get a marker and mark where I'm going to put my rivets, and for this one next to the zipper tape here, I'm going to do it from the side where I can see my zipper tape so that I'm not accidentally poking a hole in my zipper tape. Just click that together, ready to set in a minute. And I'm going to do this hole on this side. I'm eyeballing it where I'm going to put it. Now if you want to put one below this top stitching here, you need to make sure that your bag is out of the way. You're only poking the hole through the layers that you want to poke a hole through. So I'm going to set mine there. Where's my awl? There's quite a few layers here, so I just need to make sure it's gone all the way through, and it hasn't. So I need to punch the others from the other side. I can see where it's supposed to be going through, so I'll just mark that and punch from the other side like that. Now I have to actually set them. So, now that that is done, all we need to do is give everything a good press. So there we have it. We can add our strap. We have our card slots on one side, our zipper pocket on the other, and we have a slip pocket in here. You can put your phone in it or other things, and another great big slip pocket and a zipper pocket.